In this short session, I'd like to talk about 5 factors that if you're an entrepreneur, you might want to consider if you're thinking about developing your business in the mid to long term with a view to sale. And you might wonder why I'm sat outside in these conditions, which are quite variable at the moment. There's a bit of wind and a bit of background noise, so I do apologise in advance for that, and I hope that you can hear it okay. But it's really just a metaphor for my first point, which is persistence. I think as an entrepreneur, you're going to have good times, you're going to have bad times, and I think persistence is incredibly key. As we study outperforming teams and the success factors and the what cause teams to underperform over time, usually persistence is right up there amongst the key factors for teams that ultimately outperform. And for an entrepreneur, persistence with the business is important, but also if you're going through a potential deal process where your business is going to be acquired, then persistence in the deal is also worth bearing in mind, because quite often deals don't happen with the first discussions. They happen after many phases of negotiation, perhaps spread over several years. So in other words, an acquiring company often will look at a target, decide it's not for them at the time, but continue the relationship, and eventually a deal will ultimately be done. And on countless occasions I've been involved in scenarios where that's been the case. So, and I probably, if anything, maybe more deals get done when there's a long-term relationship than when there isn't. So that's worth bearing in mind. The second point is about building an organisation. Many entrepreneurs actually start life as entrepreneurs building a product or building a service. They're not building an organisation, and it's a different skill set, and it's one that's actually well worth developing as soon as possible, because that's the key really. A sustainable organisation is going to be much more attractive to a potential buyer. Doesn't mean buyers aren't out there that simply buy technologies, buy products, buy some kind of potential for the future. But the most attractive businesses are the businesses that actually have an organisation that's in play. I've got a little doggy that's come here to say hello as well. I don't know if you could see him on screen. Anyway, the third point is that, and against the backdrop of building a sustainable organisation, as an entrepreneur, it's very important that you're not the turnstile through which every transaction passes in the business, because many entrepreneurs tend to be the key decision maker on every individual scenario. And if you're the turnstile through which every transaction passes in your organisation becomes much less attractive to an acquirer, because of course, inevitably, if a transaction does happen, the entrepreneur often will realise a pretty substantial amount of money, and as a result of that, they may stay with the company for a period of time. The company has acquired them, but often motivation levels drop. Acquiring companies are aware of this, so the more sustainable and long-term your organisation is, the more attractive your business is ultimately going to be. The fourth thing is keeping great books and records. And I don't just mean great books and records from a financial standpoint, but also from a customer standpoint, an orders, a product history, whatever it might be. In other words, having a single version of the truth in the history of your organisation, so people can, when they do the due diligence process, the acquiring company, they can start to really get under the skin of what it is your business is all about, and start to get comfortable with the future potential for the business based on probably much of the only tangible stuff they can go on other than secured future orders, which is the past performance. They're looking for proof points. They do a mini audit through that due diligence process. So the better your books and records, the greater the likelihood of a transaction taking place. It's much harder for acquirers to believe information that hasn't necessarily been put together in the best way. And the fifth important factor is, we've been talking about due diligence, is the actual deal process. Due diligence takes time. It's quite a burden on the entrepreneur and the key personnel in the business, those that are in the loop in terms of the potential for the transaction. And secondly, if the due diligence is successful, often the contract process can be quite protracted as well. And I've seen many organisations that are going through a deal process. They've had a great set of results for 2 or 3 years, and the due diligence and the contract negotiations and discussions, they absorb so much of management's time that the eye's taken off the ball of the business, and that can be a real problem for entrepreneurs too. So that's worth bearing in mind. So there's 5 things I've covered today, and I hope you find it helpful. Is persistence not only in pushing your business forward, because that's the key success factor in any startups, above all else when you do the research on outperforming teams, but persistence in the prospect of getting a deal, even if one doesn't get over the line the first time you start discussions and negotiations with an interested party. The second is building a sustainable organisation. The third is for you as an individual to be working on the business, not the turnstile through which every transaction passes, not you working in the business day in and day out. The fourth is keeping great books and records so that any acquiring company's got a real good picture on the business. And the fifth is just not getting distracted through that whole deal process. I hope you find that helpful. Hi. Considering a mindset shift. Transactions that some kind of fun, the hi. Does it look all right?